G'day folks, Andy here from McDowell Manor. So a few people expressed interest in the sourdough that I'd mentioned last time, so I thought I'd give you a look at how we do that. This is my starter, so obviously I've made that a while ago. To make a starter, you use, it's a 5-day period. So on the first day you put a cup of flour and a half a cup of water in a container. I loosely put a lid on it, say like that, and then I sat it on my fridge. Next day you tip half out and you do it again. So you add another cup of flour and another half a cup of water. After about 3 or 4 days you'll find it starts to get foamy and it should get that smell, that slightly sour smell. Now the recipe I originally used said to use all-purpose flour, but I didn't, and I'll give you a look at what I did use. So I wanted to use rye flour. Now the reason I wanted to use rye rather than plain was because I happen to know it usually has a much nicer flavoured yeast that sort of lives on the flour, and you know, 9 times out of 10 I'll get a pretty good mix out of that. Now the trick I had was I couldn't bloody find rye flour for love or money. And when I did find it, it cost a fortune. So I ended up buying this pre-made bread mix, which is supposed to go in a bread machine. It was about a quarter of the price of the other flour that I could get, which I was pretty bloody happy about. And I've been doing this for months now, and you can see that I've hardly used any of the flour. So I use that flour in the amounts that I've told you to make this starter, and then when I make the bread you'll see that I just use normal flour then. And once you've done the starter you don't need to do it again. You know, I use this one over and over and over. So I'm about to feed him up, and then tomorrow he'll be nice and fluffy, and we'll use that to make what's called a leaven. And to feed him for a restart, I'll use a half a cup of rye flour and a third of a cup of water. Then by tomorrow morning he'll be nice and frothy and ready to go. So what you're looking at in front of you now is the starter. I keep that in the fridge. I feed it once a week. And a cup of rye flour, a third of a cup of water. And I'm just going to chuck them in and give them a good mix. And you can see that's all mixed in, and it's even starting to bubble already. So probably by tonight that'll be good and foamy, and we'll make the leaven up. That's the starter. I fed the starter up. Start to make the bread by making a leaven. Plain white flour, half a cup, in this bowl here. Voila. 1/3 of a cup, so same as the feeding method that I did before, of water goes into there. So that's that plain flour and the water mixed together. Now I'm going to take the starter and I'm going to pour. Now they use 1 tablespoon of starter. I use a big healthy dollop. So I probably double the starter that they use, and I'll give that a mix around, and we have then the leaven, and there it is. So we've got some starter mixed with some flour and water, and that makes the leaven, which essentially is just a breeding ground for the yeast. So that'll give us a nice big batch of healthy yeast that we can put in with the rest of the flour and the water in order to make our loaves of bread. So let's try and explain this sensibly. You can see I'm nervous about getting this across. We have a starter. That took 5 days to make. It's rye flour and water, nothing else. That grows its own yeast from the air and the rye flour. After 5 days you end up with something fairly foamy that you could use straight away. Obviously it's a fairly large amount. You only need a tablespoon, so that'll last for a long time, provided you keep feeding it. You use that to make your leaven. Your leaven is where you allow the yeast from the starter to grow in your normal flour, and then we'll add that to our other normal flour, lots of normal flour and water and a little bit of salt, and that will make the sourdough bread. Hopefully that's very clear. If it's not, don't worry, because right beside that I have a rum and coke. Now that's homemade rum with homemade Coke. So that's pretty damn good. And that makes everything clear to me. And so the leaven will just sit on the kitchen bench overnight and I'll use it tomorrow. So next day, there's our leaven. So we're about to combine that with a heap of flour, a little bit of salt and some water, and that will make our bread. So I'm going to use 5.5 cups of plain white bread flour, 2.5 cups of normal old tap water, and the leaven. So here we go. I'll do that off camera. There's the flour mixed. The flour and the water mixed in with the leaven. There's no salt in there yet. The salt gets added at the end. And you're mad if you don't mix it with your hands because it's a hell of a lot of fun. So this is next morning again. I didn't have enough time yesterday to deal with it, so I just left it overnight. And it's risen quite significantly, you can see. I'm about to turn it on to a floured bench and give it a little bit of a knead. So this is a kind of, it's not a no knead, but it's a very limited knead. What you tend to do is divide it in half and fold it over, and you do that 4 times. And I rotate it a quarter of the circle each time, so that makes sure I fold the whole lot. And believe it or not, we do that 6 times at half-hourly interviews. So I won't show you every time I do that, but I'll probably try and show you the most of this one. So that's it tipped over. Even having done very little work, you can see that it's getting a really nice texture. But we'll go through the 6 knockdowns. And that'll be the one thing I would suggest very strongly to you. This sourdough works every time, provided you don't rush it. I'll pat him down flat, and then I'm going to commence the folding. Fold number 1. Fold number 2, and you got the idea now. Back in the pot, we'll do that 6 times. Like I say, I'll cover this over, I'll leave it for a half an hour. We've got another 5 lots of folding to go. So I'll go now and do all the folds, and we'll go until it's ready for the next proper step. Okay, so that's the 6th set of folds, and with that we're also going to shape it on this 6th and last folding over. The dough's become much stronger and more stretchy. You can certainly feel the difference. It's actually quite hard to push it down when you fold it now. So I'm going to put some flour and semolina on this tray to stop the bread sticking. Then we're going to cut the dough ball into 2, and that'll shape it, and then we're going to sit it aside to prove yet again. So there's our dusted tray. I use quite a lot of flour and semolina because I don't want it to stick. I'm going to cut that in half lengthwise because I prefer 2 longer layers on the tray. Now that one probably looks a bit shiny. That's because we gave him a spray with some normal water out the tap. That saves it drying out, so I'll do the other one as well. Then we'll cover those over with a towel and we'll sit them out for a good... So it's around dinner time. Those loaves you can see have swollen quite nicely. There was quite a bit of space between them, and there's not a whole lot more now. I'm preheating the oven to 220. They'll go in there for 20 minutes. Then we'll slow it down to 180 until they look well and truly cooked. Okay, they've had a good spray again. Now that water on the outside will be what gives us a nice crispy crust. You can probably see I've added sesame seeds on there as well. I'm just about to give it the cuts. As in the maker's cuts, so that it can burst open if it needs to. I'll give you a look at that when it's done. So there they are with our maker's slashes, and the next thing we're about to do is put them in the oven. Alright, so there's the final product. I thought it was quite good. What did you think, Rosie?
Yeah, that was fantastic, Andrew.
There you go. It's a hit. See yous.